Yes, thanks a lot for the introduction and hello to everyone. I'm glad to have you all here in this webinar today. This will be presented by me and my colleague Vasily. We are both from Fraunhofer, which is a large research society in Europe, and we are working a lot both for our national ministries in Germany and for the EU Commission and in the large European research programs. And the research today, the results we show today, are also based on our work in two of these Horizon programs. Well, what are the key questions of today's webinar? We will first present trends and design approaches of energy efficiency and renewable energy auctions, and will also make some conclusions on the experience. We will first discuss energy efficiency auctions, and then afterwards my colleague will present the renewable energy auctions, and in the end we will compare these two, and also we will also show what maybe these energy efficiency and renewable energy auctions could learn from each other. As I said, this research is based on two Horizon 2020 projects. One project is Odyssey Muir on energy efficiency indicators and policies, which is a long-going project, and we already had a lot of webinars here. Today is one of the last webinars in this series, and you will also find the presentations and the material of the webinars on the Odyssey Muir website, as you can see here. And we will also prepare a policy brief on this issue, where the contents of this presentation will be presented in more detail. You can see here the homepage. The heart of the Odyssey Muir project are two databases: the Odyssey database on energy efficiency indicators and the Muir database on energy efficiency policies. And today's webinar is at least partly based on input from the Muir database.
Thank you very much, Barbara. My name is Vasilios Anatolitis. I work at Fraunhofer ISI as Barbara as well, and I'm the project coordinator of the other Horizon 2020 project, ORIS2, which stands for Auctions for Renewable Energy Support 2. So as you might imagine, we are dealing with renewable energy auctions in Europe and worldwide. We provide policy recommendations, we do classical research on the topic, and we've been working as well with Leonardo Energy. So if you're interested in renewable energy auctions, visit our website, download our reports, subscribe to our newsletter. And if you have any questions on renewable energy auctions, of course, feel free to contact us. As you might imagine as well, my role today will be to present to you the experiences with renewable energy auctions in Europe, and to compare it with the experiences of energy efficiency auctions. But before we dig deeper into the realm of renewable energy auctions, my colleague Barbara will present you and provide you an overview of energy efficiency auctions.
Yes, thank you, Vasily. We will now go on with the energy efficiency part of the webinar today. Energy efficiency as a key pillar to reach ambitious energy and climate targets. The energy efficiency first principle is the topic of this series of webinars, and it really plays a very important role in the European Green Deal, which was further strengthened by the ED recast, where energy efficiency first will probably play a even more important role in policies. What is also important is that the obligations for member states in the Energy Efficiency Directive, the former Article 7 and in the recast Article 8, were also significantly increased. That's for energy efficiency. That is, we will have more ambitious energy and climate targets. On the other hand, we also have the EU state aid guidelines, which limit the granting of state aid without a competitive bidding process. Though for energy efficiency, we have, based on the revised guidelines, some more exemptions for energy efficiency, but especially for renewable energies, this guideline is even more important, as you will later see in the presentation of my colleague. Well, that's the background. For the question, which are the most suitable instruments to achieve these higher energy efficiency targets and to find an appropriate mix of energy efficiency policies, which are on the one hand can exploit all technical and economic energy efficiency potentials, and can overcome all these barriers which are still existing, and which is, on the other hand, in line also with the state aid guidelines. And against this background, market-based instruments for energy efficiency, that is, on the one hand, energy efficiency obligation schemes, and also auctions, which are the topic of this webinar, can make an important contribution in such a mix of policies. Well, that's a figure from a large IEA report on market-based instruments for energy efficiency. Here you can see that auctions and energy efficiency obligations have some design features in common, which are also, most of them are also important for traditional financial instruments, as, for example, evaluations, the question how to calculate energy savings, monitoring, and verification. But on the other hand, you also have some specific design features which are important on the one hand for energy efficiency obligations, as, for example, the question who are the obligated parties, what's the energy saving target or maybe CO2 target of these systems, how is the trading process organized, and so on. And on the other hand, for auctions, you also have some specific design features which are both important for auctions for energy efficiency and also for renewable energies. And for energy efficiency auctions, we will I will now give a short overview of some key design features, and later compare some of these systems with regard to these features. What are energy efficiency auctions? That's a tendering mechanism in which market actors should not be obliged, but well, encouraged to develop energy saving projects and programs and offer them in competition for funding budgets at the most favorable cost-benefit ratios possible. That's the definition of this system. And there are some specific criteria. For example, what is auctioned? The auction product is usually the budget, that is the investment for energy savings usually, or electricity savings. What is important is where the funding comes from, and that's a difference to energy efficiency obligations, because usually we have it's from the public budget, but not only from the general budget from taxes, but in some systems it can also be financed by a levy on energy prices or revenues from ETS, for example, which is very similar to the energy efficiency funds, where we had a webinar some weeks ago here in this series. Well, segmentation is often done. That is partly only electricity savings are addressed, for example, or specific sectors, but it's not necessary. There are also fully technology open systems. There are several possibilities to organize auctions, but usually, as you will see in the systems, it's a static approach, and the award criteria is mainly the price, though other criteria as innovations or so can also be taken up. A payback period also very important, because in order to ensure additionality, usually the payback period is larger than the usual payback period, which is for companies, for investments, for this kind of investment. Other criteria are, for example, a ceiling price, where there's usually a maximum price, and the question of penalties, which is, as you will see later, more important in case of renewable energies than for energy efficiency auctions. Next slide. As I said, the background for this research is the Odyssey Mühe projects, and these market-based instruments for energy efficiency are also included in the Mühe database. If you have a look at that, you will find that most of these systems, because they are cross-sectoral, are described in the cross-cutting section, partly also repeated in some sectors if there's a sectoral focus in these systems. And you will, though the database is mainly on energy efficiency policies, in the cross-cutting section you will also find some some renewable systems described here, for example, feed-in tariffs, green certificates, or also some auctions. If you have a look at the number of auctions and energy efficiency obligations, then you will see that for energy efficiency, auctions are considerably less widespread in the EU member states than energy efficiency obligation schemes, and also traditional financial instruments. That is, the share is much smaller, only in a few countries, and the same picture you can also see internationally. Here is a very short overview of some of these auction systems which are valid at the moment in Europe, and all these countries are also included in the MUIR database, also Switzerland. As a non-EU country, the pro kilowatt auction is one of the oldest in Europe, starting in 2010. And as you can see here, the auction products, it's in all systems, it's the budget, but the share of support, as you can see here, is different in the pro kilowatt auction, and also in the previous German system Step Up. It was only 30% of the investment costs, whereas a new funding competition in Germany, which started in 2019, there's a much higher share of support of investments, and also in the new Danish auction system, which started from 2021 and substituted the previous energy efficiency obligation system here. You can also see that funding is usually from the public budget, partly by financed by levy on electricity consumption, and the other criteria are also relatively similar between these systems. Next slide. Only a short overview. What were the experiences with energy efficiency auctions up to now? It seems, especially when looking at the system in Switzerland, that auctions are able to reduce the support costs needed to reach energy savings. But we can also see that there are in general relatively low levels of competition. And there are some reasons for that, because on the one side, there are also parallel funding opportunities, especially traditional financial programs in these countries, which are where it is often easier to get the money, and also the transaction costs for participating are not so low, though it may be the transaction costs or also the system costs may be lower than of energy efficiency obligation systems, but nevertheless they cannot be neglected. As a result also of these structural background, we usually have a relatively high share of large enterprises, whereas smaller companies usually prefer other easier funding opportunities. And well, that's the main experience. And you see below one of the key assessments of the evaluation of the German first auction program Step Up, which was, as I said, then later substituted to another auction program, which may work somehow better, but in the previous system it was stated that the energy efficiency and energy reduction targets were not achieved due to the very low number of applications in the system. And the main reasons were, as said above, it was a relatively low funding quota of 30%, which is now higher in the new system, in connection with a competition of other easier funding opportunities, so that the risk not to get the funding in such an auction system was not taken by enough companies. Therefore, that's, I think, a good summary of the experience. But our question now was, what's the difference to renewable energy auctions, and are they maybe more successful, and what could be the reasons, and what could also energy efficiency auctions learn from that experience? And now my colleague will lead you through this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for this very interesting insights into the realm of energy efficiency auctions. As you already mentioned, we want in the end to compare the two types of auctions, the two systems. But before we can do that, I would like to take you on a journey through the history and the experiences of renewable energy auctions. So first of all, how did we arrive to renewable energy auctions in Europe? So in the 1990s, there were already some auctions, renewable energy auctions, especially in the UK and in Ireland. Unfortunately, they had quite a bad experience with them, because they awarded quite a lot of projects, but in the end, only half of those projects were realized and were installed. So it was quite disappointing. After this experience, many countries, or UK and Ireland, abandoned their renewable energy auctions, and other countries didn't even start with them. So in the 2000s, there was mainly a discussion going on between the feed-in tariffs for renewables. As you might have heard, feed-in tariffs are a fixed remuneration for generated electricity, independent of any electricity market. For our international guests, it's more or less like the PPAs from the utilities, either. So the question was either feed-in tariffs or a quota scheme, usually with tradable green certificates. But in the end, the capital-intensive renewable energy projects, since they need a secure revenue stream, the administratively set feed-in tariffs were the winner out of this contest. So now imagine in the 2010s, we had these feed-in tariffs, but the problem was more and more policymakers wanted to have a higher market integration of renewables, because since then they received the feed-in tariff, which I said is independent of the electricity market prices. So there were some issues with negative prices, so they didn't really care what was going on. Governments decided to introduce administratively set feed-in premiums. So this means generators need to sell their electricity on the market and receive from the government a certain amount of money on top of that, which can either be fixed or a sliding one. I stress a lot this administratively set, because in this case, the government said, look, I give you this amount of money, and if you want to build a project, if this money is okay for you, just come to us and you will get the money. So a little bit like a traditional financing instrument. But since 2014, governments and especially the EU Commission wanted to introduce more competition, more market into the support. So we observed a gradual shift towards auctions to determine the allocation of the funds and the levels of support. So basically, generators and project developers need to go to the auction, participate there and say, I need this amount of money, and not the other way around, how it was with the administratively set premiums and tariffs. And up to date, 19 EU member states have introduced auctions to support renewable energies, and actually only 3 countries still use quota schemes. And I guess coming from the energy efficiency realm, and especially what Barbara said, this is completely the other way around. In many other sectors, we see more and more quantity-based support schemes, so basically quota schemes, let it be energy efficiency or the ETS in Europe, for example. But in the renewable sector, we don't see them much. That was not always the case. So in the past, Belgium, Italy, Poland, Romania, Sweden, and the UK actually had a quota scheme in place. But in the end, nowadays, as I said, only Belgium, Romania, and Sweden still have it in place. You might wonder what were the reasons for abandoning the quota schemes or not even including them. So first of all, the quota schemes usually lacked effectiveness. So the targets were not really achieved or almost achieved. And it wasn't that efficient in the sense of there were always a lot of high prices for the the green certificates, but still volatile. And the consumers actually had to pay quite a lot of money. And on the other hand, some countries, for example, Germany or Spain, had the administratively set feed-in tariffs, and they actually surpassed the targets by a lot. Just to give you an idea how it works, so the problem is with a quota scheme, the investors are fully exposed to market price risk. So as you can see here, the electricity market income is volatile. The support payments in the sense of the green certificate prices, it's volatile, and it might not even be sufficient to refinance the projects. In contrast, with a feed-in tariff, independent of the electricity market income, the generators receive a certain amount of money, and which hopefully is enough so they can refinance the project. So feed-in tariffs make more sense, and using auctions is pretty much a natural next step, at least in the European renewable energy policy, because there was a long-standing experience with the feed-in tariffs and premiums. And then it's quite easy to say, look, if we want to have more competition, instead of us telling you how big this level is, just come to us and tell us how much you need. So one can even speak of a path dependency. So a very brief overview of how renewable energy auctions are designed. The auction product is mostly capacity and energy, and actually to auction a budget is is only rarely applied. And in contrast to energy efficiency auctions, we see a lot of generation-based remuneration. So energy efficiency auctions provide funding in terms of a one-time investment or for the investment support, while renewable energies are supported based on their generation. We see usually multi-unit auctions. This means a lot of projects can participate and are awarded, not only one. Then a segmentation. In the past, we saw a lot of technology-specific auctions. So, for example, onshore wind participated only against onshore wind projects, and solar PV only against solar PV. But nowadays, we see more and more multi-technology auctions. So onshore wind projects and PV projects compete against each other, which is a little bit different outside of Europe. Auction procedures: pay as bid, pay as cleared is only rarely used, mostly static auctions. Price-only auctions is the award criteria. And I would like to highlight that the payback period is actually not relevant in renewable energy auctions. There's no need to verify the costs. There is quite strict pre-qualification criteria. So to permit in the auctions, you need to have a material pre-qualification, so necessary building permits, for example, or other financial pre-qualifications. Ceiling prices are usually used in all auctions, and there are some additional non-performance penalties that I will come to later. And the volume adjustment is really only used in a few countries, which I will explain later on as well. So in a nutshell, what were the experiences with renewable energy auctions? So we saw a decrease in support levels compared to the administratively set support schemes. But of course, we need to ask ourselves, was it maybe only because of the falling technology costs, which decreased in the past years quite significantly for renewable energies? Then from a scientific perspective, what is the counterfactual, and is it even comparable? Can we compare our the current awarded prices in auctions with feed-in tariffs from 4 years ago? And nevertheless, the awarded prices in the auctions are stagnating in the past years, sometimes due to low competition levels and due to some other reasons. But in any case, it's a question if it's possible to compare the two outcomes. In terms of the auctioned volumes, they were actually contracted, so there was always at least enough applications to satisfy the auctioned volume. Sometimes undersubscription occurred, as in Germany with the onshore wind auctions. But in the end, which is important, there's a relatively high realization rate. So in contrast to the first auctions, nowadays we can deal with this problem. There's always a trade-off between ensuring sufficient competition and ensuring a high realization rate, because of course, the higher the penalties are, the more questions you have, the more permits they need to submit before entering the auction, the less project developers will participate. One message to the policymakers that we follow in ORIS2 is to be consistent about the stated policy objectives, because sometimes objectives can be contrary, and that's why it's important to prioritize. Another observation we made was the projects in pipeline effect. This means when there are periods without any renewable energy support, for example, in Spain or in Greece, the first auction then has quite a lot of competition, which is on the one hand, of course, quite positive, but comes at a cost. And what is more important or relevant for the energy efficiency auctions is the so-called rush effect into the old system. Because a lot of, if you know, okay, there comes a new system which is riskier than the previous one, everybody will try to get the old secure funding. And that's why this might lead to low competition in the new riskier system. And our main message from renewable energy auction experience is always keep the design as simple as possible. And coming now to the most important question, or the main question we had for this webinar, which is what can energy efficiency auctions and renewable energy auctions learn from each other? So before we started the research, I thought there are many more common key characteristics in both auction systems, but in the end, as you can see, it's quite a low number. Nevertheless, so as I mentioned, the outside options, the parallel opportunities, they need to be taken into account, as well as the rush effect to the old system. That was important for both realms, let it be renewable energies or energy efficiency. Then we see a lot of multi-item auctions. The segmentation of auctions is quite typical for both energy efficiency and renewables, let it be actors or technologies, and pay as bid is the main pricing rule. And multi-criteria auctions are rarely used, which might show that policymakers are more focused on cost efficiency, on delivering on low prices, achieving low prices in the auction than other policy objectives. And what are the key differences between energy efficiency and renewable energy auctions? So in general, there are more exemptions for energy efficiency than renewable energy in the EU stated guidelines. So this gives energy efficiency auctions or more leeway in the design. Then what struck us was that additional penalties are mostly applied in renewable energy auctions. So of course, if you are awarded in an energy efficiency auctions and you don't deliver or conduct your project, you don't get the support. The same with renewable energy auctions, but in addition, you have to pay a fine to the auctioneer, which of course makes you having a higher incentive than in an energy efficiency auction. The payback period is actually of no concern in the renewable energy auctions. So you can just state any price that you want, and if you're successful, you will get this price. In contrast, energy efficiency auctions, you have this monitoring and especially the verification aspect, which might, of course, reduce the level of competition. The auction product in renewable energy auctions is usually capacity or energy, as I already mentioned, while energy efficiency auctions usually auction off an overall budget. I already mentioned that as well. Renewable energies are supported based on their generation, while the energy efficiency auctions are usually based, the support is based on investments. What struck me as well is energy efficiency auctions usually follow a predetermined schedule, while renewable energy auctions in some cases not. The volume adjustment, which is there to artificially generate competition, For example, in Switzerland and possibly in Germany is much more common in energy efficiency auctions. And the ceiling prices are a little bit more common in renewable energy auctions, so to avoid overcompensation. So what are our conclusions? As Barbara mentioned, one issue of energy efficiency auctions is the low level of competition. So to increase the competition, one should think about the outside options, the parallel options. One should consider decreasing the minimum payback period, so more projects could theoretically participate. And the effects of the volume adjustment need to be further researched. We did this for renewable energies, and we are quite critical of this design element. And on the other hand, to ensure a high realization rate effectiveness, it's important maybe to introduce non-performance penalties, these additional fines for non-realization, and financial pre-qualification criteria as well. So as you can see, there are a lot of trade-offs which we are happy to discuss right now in the Q&A session. But as it's important for me to stress that to keep it simple when designing the auction. The same for renewable energies, the same for counts for energy efficiency auctions. And last but not least, to maybe provide a discussion point or an idea for further research is, should we start thinking more about the energy efficiency first principle and think about a joint auction for energy efficiency and renewables? There are already some examples, but I think it's worth to look deeper into that. So thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and if you have any questions, we are happy to answer them.